in the movie Jumanji, which was like, I don't know, a big part of my childhood. But like there's this, it's just such an erotic flower. It's very like pink and looks like an orifice, and it's just such a special kind of like movie image object, and I think was definitely an influence on the sculpture. I'm Emily Oliveira. This is my installation, I Saw God and She Wasn't Made of Money. Science fiction is a huge influence on my work. It's not necessarily like always a one-to-one, it's kind of like metaphor for the way our world currently is, but thinking about starting with sort of the first step towards changing the way that our world currently is, which is imagining the world in a different way and kind of using science fiction and the figures and tropes of science fiction as a way for talking about the kind of oppressive ways that capitalism can kind of constrain our imagination and make it difficult for us to imagine the world in a different way. I talk a lot about ideas of like leisure and free time and time not being consumed by work, and the idea that like, especially this past summer, that like people had time to like do mutual aid and direct action. Like that is not, those two things are deeply connected into one another, that when we are not so like completely have our time completely eaten up by production, that we maybe have time to like take care of one another. Of the pieces in the room, there's one quilt, which is the large double-sided one, it's a very long title, but the beginning of it is Everything Must Go. So that quilt, that double-sided quilt, is the first in a series of 7 that are kind of about, that take place at different times of day, and that for me, sort of relating to that idea of revolution as a continuous act rather than sort of just this like instantaneous change and then afterwards everything is fine. So this side, the idea is that it's kind of like a portal, because I've been thinking a lot about the quilts themselves as portals. It also took probably the longest because it's one of the most detailed quilts that I've ever made. As you get closer, there are just like these tiny, you know, in particular here, there's just these tiny little like figurative details that I just get really excited by. And I also enjoy the kind of the different layers of information in a quilt specifically, that there's, you know, the pattern that is on each of the different fabrics that you use, and then there's like the way that you cut them and piece them together, and then there's like the layer of information that's the stitching that kind of blends all of it together, and then there's like embellishing on top of that, so using beads and using crystals and rhinestones and things like that. It's important for me for there to be Black bodies and Indigenous bodies and trans and gender nonconforming bodies in my work, because if like their omission would be pretty contrary to the things that I believe about the world and that I believe about the way we should be, you know, thinking about transforming our world. And also because this is like a future that I imagine like for me and my friends.